I want to talk about a TED Talk that is, one, absolutely terrible, two, by a thinker I admire, and three, case in point for a syndrome I despise, which existed before the internet but is worse because of the internet. And that is bad, fundamentally incorrect information convincing people because it's slickly produced and convenient to consume. Now, this can be accomplished by bad actors who are trying to convince people of something that they know is incorrect, or, as in the case with Gladwell's video, I think just a product of overconfidence and confirmation bias. Also, this kind of content results in something else I can't stand. The cockiness that these consumers then walk around with, thinking they now know the real story and know everything they need to know about whatever subject. Here's one very quick example from elsewhere. There's an atrocious video called How Star Wars Was Saved in the Edit on YouTube. It's gotten millions of views, it's a short watch, 18 minutes, and makes a convincing argument within the ecosystem of its own video of kind of an alternate, completely fabricated history of the making of the movie and how it was, quote, saved in the edit, end quote. You don't have to believe me, of course. You could watch this 2-hour deconstruction of that video and judge for yourself. The important point is, and I've seen this online, folks have watched that original video and walked away fully confident that they know the real story. And I'd be willing to bet a lot that's what most people think when they watch the Malcolm Gladwell TED Talk on David and Goliath. And this is all pretty weird because I think Malcolm Gladwell is brilliant. His podcast, Revisionist History, is one of my favorites. I mean, I definitely do not doubt his intelligence in any way, but I also don't doubt his intellectual honesty or curiosity. So it's an interesting case study. How did somebody this smart come to a conclusion this wrong? And with the stage set, let's now get into what he says and how stupefyingly, inexplicably wrong it is. Of course, you're free to watch it for yourself before you listen to me. It's only 15 minutes, even faster if you speed it up. But here's the bottom line. Gladwell's contention is that we, all of us, have been wrong about the story of David and Goliath for all this time. Probably as well known of a story of the underdog as there is in the history of Western civilization. It's in the Bible, of course, and the Bible has been pored over and thought about and researched by scholars for thousands of years, obsessively. And yet it took until well into the 21st century for someone to realize and publicize that, hey, it's the opposite of what we've always thought, guys. Now, I'm all for revisionist history. I'm not referring to the podcast, although I am for that too, but for the general concept, right? Always revisiting, questioning previous assumptions. But I am not for wanting to flip an old understanding on its head so badly that you invent or fall in love with a ridiculous hypothesis. Stumbling across one or two anomalies that make you think, hey, maybe there's more to this, and then going through a giant exercise of confirmation bias that convinces many people, including yourself, of a fundamentally and obviously incorrect conclusion. Here we go anyway. My synopsis, I'm going to be as fair as I can be, of the TED Talk. The point of the TED Talk is that David was not in fact an underdog when properly understood. In fact, when you decode the story and analyze things correctly, he was all but certain to triumph. The duel was actually a horrible mismatch in David's favor, and Goliath, far from being an almost unbeatable fearsome warrior, was actually sick, slow, and very poor-sighted. Incapable of even walking down a valley, the valley where he would meet up with David, without assistance. Now, if all of that sounds ridiculous, it's because it is. And I am not saying this coming from a place of, passionate defense of the Judeo-Christian tradition and historical teachings. No, don't care. I say this as someone who knows a little bit, certainly much more than Malcolm Gladwell, about ancient warfare, weapons, martial arts, the history of fighting, etc. So, real briefly, I've written a couple of books about weapons. I actually think I've filled in several gaps in weapons history. I'm a lifelong martial artist, blah, blah, blah. But let's look at how Gladwell supports his thesis. He gives historical background on the showdown between the Philistines and the Israelites, and why they were in a stalemate, both sides occupying high ground that they did not want to abandon, thereby exposing them to what would no doubt be a productive attack from the other side. So the Philistines come up with a different approach. They send one of their own to challenge the other army. Hey, give me your best man, send me whoever you want, and I will defeat them one-on-one. And the warrior they send is, of course, Goliath. and he issues the challenge for 40 days. And day after day, for well over a month, he struts in front of the Israelites and taunts them. Somebody, get up the guts, come fight me. But none of the Israelite warriors wanted to take up the challenge because he's so fearsome. Quoting Gladwell now, the warrior who's sent down by the Philistines is a, quote, mighty warrior, a giant. Skipping ahead, quote, he is absolutely terrifying, and he's so terrifying that none of the Israelite soldiers wanted to fight him, end quote. And here's something really important that the TED Talk leaves out, the stakes. I'm quoting Goliath himself from the Bible. Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us, end quote. Goliath and his fellow Philistines are so confident in his ability to beat any man from the other side. They don't know the Israelites could have a total beast of a dude over there as well. Anyone, sight unseen, they're so confident that they're willing to risk going all into slavery if their guy loses. But remember, I said the fourth pillar of the TED Talk is that Goliath was a sick, slow, poor-sighted man who could not safely make his way down a valley without assistance. And need proof that this is his position? Quote, the Bible says that Goliath is led onto the valley floor by an attendant. Now that is weird, right? Here is this mighty warrior going challenging the Israelites to one-on-one combat. Why is he being led by the hand by some, young boy, end quote. And notice how he moves the audience along with him. This is how bad arguments work. I don't mean bad faith, by the way. You get the audience to make that leap of logic with you, unfounded leap. And then you can keep taking them as far as you want in that direction. And yourself, if this is a case of where you're basically tricking yourself. The confirmation bias that I talked about earlier. And so anyway, remember, Goliath has someone leading him down the valley. Okay, quote, that's weird, right? End quote. No, it's not. Not even a little. The attendant is Goliath's shield bearer, his squire, his valet. This is completely to be expected, by the way. Something else that Gladwell leaves out about Goliath, quoting from the Bible again, quote, a champion named Goliath, end quote. I'm the best warrior in this army. I'm a champion, the victor of many previous battles. I have someone that carries my crap for me to the site of a one-on-one confrontation. There's nothing weird about him having an attendant and leading him down the valley at all. The King James Version of the Bible says, quote, and one bearing a shield went before him, end quote. Even worse in that quotation I read is Gladwell saying that Goliath was, quote, led by the hand by some young boy, end quote. In no version of the Bible that I'm aware of does it say Goliath was led by the hand. The transformation from a shield bearer walking in front of you as a sign of your prestige, carrying your stuff that you're going to use in the fight, to him holding you by the hand as if you're a 90-year-old grandma crossing the street with assistance, is inexcusable. Here's a version from a different translation of the Bible. Quote, meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David, end quote. By the way, just as an intellectual exercise, let's even take that completely made up, fabricated detail at face value and say that Goliath was led literally by the hand. Would that prove that he was this near helpless person? Well, we could look to the most popular sport in the world by a wide margin to prove that no, you still wouldn't be able to just draw that conclusion and make it this unassailable point. Are World Cup finalists some of the finest athletes on earth incapable of walking out to the pitch on their own? Obviously not. Let's continue with the TED Talk. Quote, the Bible story makes special note of how slowly Goliath moves. Another odd thing to say when you're describing the mightiest warrior known to man at that point, right? End quote. And once again, wrong. One, I challenge anyone to read the story of David and Goliath for themselves and then see if they agree with Gladwell's description. I'm willing to bet a lot you won't. It doesn't in any way that I can see, in looking at multiple translations, describe his movements as slow. Descriptions of his movements are all neutral. But regardless, once again, let's take that at face value, even if it did. We have the exact same Jedi mind trick, maybe Jedi self-mind trick as before. A data point, oh that's weird, right? Not proving in any way that it is weird, and then worse, transforming it into something that is flat out false because it feeds your narrative. But again, even if we're going to be incredibly generous and pretend that the Bible takes special note of how slowly Goliath moves, which it doesn't, have you ever watched a boxer, MMA fighter, judoka in the Olympics, etc., come out to the ring? It's usually pretty slow. They saunter out. You're saving your energy for the upcoming fight. I believe a performative part of it is that you're also trying to exude confidence. I remember walking out to, martial arts competitions, karate and jiu-jitsu, and trying my dead level best to look cool and confident. I looked neither and was neither, but that's beside the point. So let's move on. I'm going in the order of the argument, by the way, with these quotations. Quote, "Then there's this strange comment he makes to David. Am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks, right? Sticks. David only has one stick." Well, it turns out there's been a great deal of speculation in the medical community about whether there's something fundamentally wrong with Goliath in an attempt to make sense of all those apparent anomalies. End quote. Once again, we'll take him at his word here. I'm not going to go verify that there's been a lot of speculation, a, quote, great deal of speculation within the medical community. But if so, then those people, equally ignorant about the basics of weapons and warfare history, wasted a lot of energy, like Gladwell, spinning up hypothetical alternate explanations for something that doesn't need an alternate explanation. So the idea here is that Goliath apparently sees more than one stick in David's hand when he's only holding one, his shepherd's staff. And what could explain this? The TED Talk now goes into a complicated rabbit hole, making the case that Goliath probably had a specific medical condition related to his, again, probable/assumed gigantism. So double hypothetical diagnoses going on, all so that we can say, aha, he must have had this one condition related to gigantism which affects vision. He then lists 3 historical individuals as apparently relevant. I don't think anyone was questioning that gigantism exists, but he names a man who grew to be 8'11", but died at 24, Robert Wadlow, world-famous professional wrestler Andre the Giant, one of my childhood favorites, I'm still fascinated by him, and one of my other favorite people of all time, Abraham Lincoln. Reminder, if you want to see all kinds of cool Lincoln artifacts, including an actual lock of his hair and a piece of his blood-stained shirt, then you can do that on a video that I have on my channel, this one here. So anyway, what is the point of bringing these people into the conversation? Well, it's obviously to buttress this incredibly speculative claim that Goliath had a specific medical condition affecting his vision. I mean, that's exactly when they're brought into the TED Talk, right after the speculation that maybe Goliath couldn't see so well. So did any of these 3 individuals have vision problems, especially when they were in their physical prime? Well, the TED Talk says nothing about any of that, just mentioned these people. Doesn't even mention Robert wore glasses. And stepping back, these people, on the whole, 2 out of 3, don't really support the TED Talk's argument. Andre the Giant did, of course, eventually suffer more and more from the effects of his medical condition, but he also made his living in a physically brutal occupation for decades. You can see footage of Harley Race body slamming him outside of the ring onto cement, maybe cement covered with some very thin padding at best. This is an incredibly demanding sport. Anyone who was ever a fan of it or reads about these people's lives, these insane people's lives, understands that, despite the fakery. And as long as Gladwell chose to bring Andre into the picture, do you know what else Andre could do? Fight. For real. It seems he was never bested outside of the ring. At best, we can say Blackjack Mulligan, seen here on the right, fought him to a standstill one night. Blackjack Mulligan, a monster in his own right, as you can see here, just not even that much smaller than Andre. But let's look at the logic at play here. Goliath might have had this medical condition, which would explain his size. Here's someone else who that we know had that medical condition, but that guy was an athlete for decades and fought successfully against big, violent, drunk people, fellow wrestlers, multiple times and won. And not only was he hale enough to do all those things, but he apparently could see well enough to do that job for so many years. The complete hypothetical, hey, Goliath might have had the same condition as Andre the Giant, is not a good one if you're trying to make the argument that Goliath was incapable of actually fighting, moving athletically, etc. So now let's get to Abraham Lincoln, because I said 2 out of the 3 choices by Gladwell don't support his argument. 1, we don't know, as Gladwell admits, we don't even know if Abraham Lincoln had any of the conditions that are being talked about in the video. So why bring him up? But you chose to bring him up, so let's talk about Lincoln. Lincoln was an accomplished fighter, despite his gentle nature. He was the champion of frontier wrestling matches like this, and those frontier wrestling matches were nasty business. And despite his lean frame, he was quite famous for how strong and hardy he was. This was legendary in his early political career. He was the rail splitter. They made political hay off of this. He could swing mallets and axes with the best of them. Eminent historian Doris Kearns Goodwin says he performed a feat of strength with an axe one time that no soldier, or I think it was sailor, present could match. And I know we don't have proof positive that that exact instance happened, but again, he was famous for his physicality, his capableness. He also fought off 2 intruders on a boat as a young man. Once again, let's step back and look at the logic at play here. Abraham Lincoln might have had a medical condition that Goliath might have had, and therefore that supports that Goliath wouldn't have been an actual or good fighter. Back to reality, Abraham Lincoln was a good fighter. He doesn't help your case either, and it took more flights of fancy to try and connect him to Goliath than Andre. At least Andre had the medical condition that you're proposing Goliath might have had. And let's bring it back to the vision. Does anybody know any stories about Abraham Lincoln being practically blind or whatnot? And if you've been paying attention, you might think I just exaggerated, because all I've mentioned about the vision thing so far is how Gladwell is saying that Goliath seems to have seen 2 sticks, 2 staves, when there was only 1. So let me quote him further. This is him starting by quoting Goliath, and then he takes over. Quote, "When he says, 'Come to me that I might feed your flesh to the birds of the heavens and the beasts of the field,' the phrase 'come to me' is a hint also of his vulnerability. Come to me because I can't see you, right?" End quote. Stop saying right after you make a claim that has no justification whatsoever. I defy anybody watching my video to read the story of David and Goliath for yourself, multiple translations if you want, and see if you agree that there's any evidence or hint that Goliath has such poor sight that he needs David to come closer to him just so he can see him. You won't find it. This is falling in love with a hypothesis and then seeing confirmation of it everywhere you look because you want to believe it so badly. And this is a great picture of Gladwell, by the way. I mean that. It looks, like early Electric Dylan. If you poke around my channel, you'll see I worship Dylan. So anyway, just saying, don't think that was a backhanded compliment or anything. Far from it. Anyway, you don't have to believe me. Just read the story for yourself and see if you see evidence that Goliath is so blind that, again, he has to be led by the hand down into the valley. Like he would be incapable of walking down there by himself. Let's quote him again regarding this speculative diagnosis regarding his vision. Quote, "Would also explain," again, the diagnosis, "would also explain so much of what was strange about his behavior." Pause. As I've been pointing out, there's nothing strange about Goliath's behavior. Resume. "Strange about his behavior that day, right? Why does he move so slowly?" Pause. Again, there's no evidence that he's moving so slowly. Continue. "And have to be escorted down into the valley floor by an attendant." End quote. And again, wrong. The word right is like this tell in this video. It's like a punctuator marking these instances where a completely baseless claim is made. And now let's finish with the vision thing, because the Rosetta Stone for Gladwell on all of this is the following quotation. A quote, "And then there's the, 'Am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks?' He sees 2 sticks," end quote. This time I'll admit at least there's something factual for Gladwell to cling to in the text. Yeah, clearly he says sticks, plural. But does that really prove that he was seeing 2? Isn't it possible this is just a common speech thing? Now, obviously I don't speak the original language, I don't understand the many translations, I'm not a biblical scholar, but in this day and age, imagine, for instance, you might be wondering why we're showing this picture, this famous scene starring Sean Connery from the movie The Untouchables. He says to his would-be assassin, "Brings a knife to a gunfight," because his would-be assassin is holding a knife. A single knife. But would you really have questioned the line or even just thought twice about it if, with the exact same scene, Sean Connery had said, "Isn't that just like I'm going to skip the racial slur, bringing knives to a gunfight?" Like, that would have worked. If somebody brings up in an argument someone else's mother, you could picture the guy saying, "Oh, you're going to bring moms into this?" Even though only one mom had thus far been invoked. Isn't this the far simpler, more reasonable explanation than Goliath being so blind that he can't walk unassisted, he can't see somebody until they get up close to them, and then when they do, he sees double. And by the way, if he saw double, why would he only see 2 sticks? Wouldn't he then see 2 Davids? I'm just going to leave this picture up for a while because it's so good. Oh, what a great shot. So, again, let's think of this just simply and logically, and in doing so, include 2 important points that Gladwell does not mention, does not share with his audience. 1, Goliath was a champion, so the victor of previous fights. And 2, the Philistines are so confident in Goliath, in his ability to beat anyone, sight unseen, from the opposing army, that they are willing to risk the rest of their lives. Remember, if Goliath loses, then the Philistines will serve out the remainder of their years on the planet as slaves to their enemies. Imagine if you were the Philistine commander or king or one of its other soldiers. Would you let Goliath, a man who can't see, who can't even walk unassisted, who can't move quickly, would you let him go out and challenge the other army knowing what you know about him? Would you let him gamble the rest of your life on the outcome? Of course not. This is incredibly obvious stuff. The entire point of the TED Talk is just like inexplicably, bizarrely illogical. Isn't it infinitely more reasonable that Goliath is exactly what the story paints him as, a giant and fearsome warrior, a proficient warrior? Let's quote from the Bible again. Goliath says, quote, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Skipping ahead. Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. End quote. And so if any Israeli has the guts to do this and can pull it off, they win the ancient lottery. But none are even willing to try. Well, is it because they're fooled by Goliath? Here's another detail Gladwell does not mention at all that's pretty important. I mentioned it earlier, but let's see it in more detail. From the good book again, quote, "For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand," end quote. 1, does that sound like someone who can't walk on their own? No. 2, that's 80 opportunities for the Israelite army to observe this guy. Was Goliath that good at hiding his infirmity, right? Were him and his aide so good at hiding his practical helplessness that nobody noticed over those 40 days? Like, wait a minute, I can take that guy. None of this comes even close to passing the common sense test. And now we have to focus on David, but this will not take very long. Because remember, the whole point is that when the whole story is properly decoded and understood, the fight is actually a horrible mismatch in David's favor. I think I'm exaggerating. Let me quote Gladwell. Quote, "Goliath is a sitting duck. He never has a chance," end quote. So I'm going to surmise here. Again, you're welcome to watch the TED Talk on your own. You should. But basically, this all hangs on the fact that Gladwell sees this as a long-distance fighter, David, with his sling, which he's really good with because he's a shepherd, right? He uses it to defend his flocks and all that, against a short-range fighter, Goliath. Real quick, I just have to admit, I'm going in reverse order. I started talking about Goliath first because I knew that was going to be the bigger portion. Again, this part will be quick. And Gladwell talks about David first and then Goliath. Anyway, Gladwell basically pumps up the sling, a great weapon, to the stratosphere. Yes, it was a good weapon. Yes, it was an effective one. Does having it and being good with it and being unarmored set you up well to triumph over a well-armed and armored heavy infantry soldier? No, not at all. If a king or a general in the ancient world had no resource limitations, if they could afford to equip every one of their soldiers like Goliath, they absolutely would. Of course, you would put them in body armor, give them a sword, a spear. And no king or general back then, in my opinion, and no military historian today would say, okay, you know what? Give me 100 guys outfitted like David, as long as they're really good with their slings, and I'll take them over 100 guys outfitted like Goliath in a battle. Absolutely not. Gladwell claims that a sling has the same stopping power as a 45mm handgun. I don't know for a fact, admittedly, but I'm pretty sure Gladwell is making the mistake of referencing experiments where slings firing lead bullets roughly approximate the results of a handgun. Slingers in ancient Greece and Rome fired specially made lead bullets. If you could equip them with those instead of stones, then you did. David picked up some rocks from the riverbed. The show Deadliest Warrior once tested sling stones, fired from an actual sling, against human skulls. They might have been approximated, I don't remember, it's been a while. But they produced, I think at best, like a depressed skull fracture, which you would not want and could kill you, but that's a far cry from what a handgun would do from the same distance, because they were using these up close. But all of this is the most debatable part about this pseudo-debate that I'm having here. You can at least try to make this case. You can point out how Alexander used his slingers in a critical role, in a signature victory. Or how my favorite general of all time, Hannibal Barca, known as the father of military strategy, highly valued his Balearic slingers. Not that Gladwell mentions any specifics like I just did, he just makes this odd sweeping statement, quote, "Over the history of ancient warfare you will find time and time again that slingers were the decisive factor against infantry," end quote. It's not that you can't say that, but I think that's highly misleading. Slingers from the two armies I mentioned, like elsewhere, they were basically supplemental troops. They were there to soften up the other side, not to provide the critical finishing blow. But you know whose opinion is far more important than mine or even a current professional military historian? The people who created the story of David and Goliath and the people they created it for. The story makes no sense unless it was well understood that, of course, David's the underdog, that an unarmored boy with a sling against a very large, fully armed and armored soldier was a horrible mismatch in the latter's favor. I mean, let's think about this. These people lived through this kind of warfare. If a sling beats heavy infantry in kind of a rock, paper, scissors, dynamic, then they would have known that, and the story wouldn't couch David as the underdog. Do you want to stick to in-story explanations, sticking to the internal logic of the story? Okay. Saul is like, you can't fight him like that. Saul is a military commander. Wouldn't he have known, hey, this is great. This is going to work out really well. David will be able to just pick him apart from a distance, and Goliath will never get a chance to close the gap. It's really clear. Saul only lets David go because he has no choice. No one else will even try. Don't believe me? Go read the story for yourself. And you really can't examine this story even as just an exercise in like weapons and warfare analysis without understanding the religious context. Do we really have to question the point of the whole story is that David triumphs over these impossible odds because he has God's assistance, because he's so faithful? If we accept that as true, and I think it's pretty hard to argue anything otherwise, then that's the only way to interpret everything else about the story. Otherwise, what's the moral of this moralistic biblical tale? That the better weapon wins? Like, really? So, anyway, I'd like to say I'm guilty of the exact syndrome that I've spent about half an hour criticizing Gladwell on here. I once had to pull down a video from my channel within my area of expertise, the group of weapons that I am the historian of, because I made a stupid video because someone sent me something that they and then I thought was anomalous. I fell in love with this novel, and it turns out incorrect idea, and ran with it. Somebody in the comments had to point out that object isn't what you think it is. And anyway, that's, in my case, and I think in Gladwell's case, that's a well-intentioned person making this mistake. Imagine when you have someone with nefarious intentions selectively choosing what evidence to give you, omitting whatever they want, etc. It's really easily done. We love to watch and consume something, especially if it looks real nice and slick, unlike this video that you just watched now, and walk away feeling, well, now I know the story. I mean, like, within my area of expertise, weapons and martial arts, like, trust me, I see content by very big YouTube creators all the time that is terrible, just wildly off base. But they've got a big subscriber base, so they're more apt to, I think, believe themselves, kind of drink their own Kool-Aid like Gladwell did here, etc. So anyway, the next time you're convinced by something and everything you know about that thing is from that one video that you watched or that one article that you read, think about this video and how even a well-intentioned and very intelligent person can produce something that is wildly off base. And please don't be one of those people who then walks away with this cocky feeling like you're in the club and you know the real story because you swallowed one bad take without verifying anything from it. Ugh, you don't know how Star Wars was saved in the edit? Well, I do. I watched one video without having any idea how misleading or distorted it is. Oh, you don't know how nunchucks are actually terrible weapons? Well, this one guy says they are, and he's got a huge channel, so he must be right. Not knowing that person is completely unskilled and did no research of any kind. Oh, you're one of those sheep that thinks the story about David and Goliath is about the triumph of the underdog? Nah, here's the real story. Goliath never had a chance. Bye.